Propaganda was used by many nations to convince the world that they are superior and to gain people's support. Propaganda came in many forms, like posters, comics, leaflets, radio, and movies. Over 200,000 different poster designs were printed. They were used the most because they were cheap and easy to produce. They could also be spread around the nation fairly easily by being put on telephone poles and handed out at schools. Comics appealed to kids who would be one day the face of the nation. These comics had similar themes, including fighting powers and buying war bonds. Leaflets were small pieces of paper with information on them similar to posters. Leaflets were dropped from planes into enemy nations to warn them of the power that they were fighting against. Radio was the most widespread method of propaganda. Most U.S. homes had radio and were tuned into patriotic stations, including Teddy Roosevelt's Fireside Chats. Movies featured a strong favoritism towards allies and included an exciting war aspect that grabbed the public's attention and support for the nation.
So, Tyler, as an expert on wartime propaganda, which type of propaganda would you say is the most effective?
Well, Brendan, I would say that posters were most effective because they're so easy to produce and were seen by so many people.
The United States government was not into the idea of propaganda at first. This was because the propaganda during World War I, which left a bad reputation with the American citizens. The U.S. adopted the strategy of truth, where they would release information but not try and sway the public's opinion regarding the war. This helped the American people feel like they had a part in the war. This also means that most of the propaganda involved Americans conserving resources. Americans used many different forms of propaganda against the Japanese to promote citizen support. American propagandists portrayed the Japanese as blindly fanatic and ruthless, with a history of desiring overseas conquests. They did this to pin the people against the Japanese in order to get support for the army and soldiers. They used many different posters to promote both anti-Japanese views and support for the war. Some posters were very extreme and could even be considered racist against the Japanese. Although the Americans were not necessarily fully into using a lot of propaganda, it definitely had a big impact on the war. The Americans used propaganda against Nazi Germany much like how they did against Japanese. Hitler was often depicted in situations ridiculing him, and cartoons usually depicted him by using cartoon-like drawings. Hitler's dictatorship was often heavily ridiculed. To raise moral support, even prior to the turning of the war in the Allies' favor, Hitler often appeared in editorial cartoons as doomed. He and the German people were depicted as fools. Germans were often stereotyped as evil in films and posters, although many atrocities were specifically attributed to Nazis and Hitler, rather than to the German people. Propaganda against Germans had the similar purpose as the Japanese, as to support conservation and get citizen support. American involvement in World War II, propaganda was used to increase support for the war and commitment to an Allied victory. It often urged people for the war production and persuaded people to save some of their material so more material could be used for the war effort. They also used it to sell war bonds, which directly helped the army. Patriotism became the central theme of advertising throughout the war by promoting efficiency in factories, reducing rumors, and maintaining civilian morale. By using propaganda to persuade their own people to help, Americans were able to gain a leg up in resources. This really helped the Americans and Allies win the overall war.
In Nazi Germany, the Nazis tried implanting fear of Americans into the civilians' vision of the world. Throughout the streets, big banners and posters portrayed America as all KKK and slave owners. Many posters saw us as mass murderers, child murderers. Many of the posters referred to every single race besides the Nazis as weak and cowardly. The Nazis saw themselves as a superior race. They thought that with this privilege, they should fix everything wrong with the world.
So, Ollie, as a famous historian, who would you say had the best propaganda during World War II?
Well, Mr. Famous Historian, throughout all the cultures, throughout Europe and all the different strategies, I would have to say that America had the best propaganda due to their very intelligent minds. They just, because they didn't only use propaganda just for violence. They used propaganda for so much more, and it just really inspires me.
Well, thank you for your time, and that'll be all.